Hello and welcome to today's press conference and dialogue with former National Security Agency Technical Director Bill Binney. Executive Intelligence Review, which is partially sponsoring this, is a magazine founded by the economist and statesman Lyndon LaRouche in 1974. It's been continually published for 46 years. The Schiller Institute is an international human rights organization founded by Helga Sepp LaRouche in 1984. It's recently held several conferences devoted to the convening of a summit conference among particularly Russia, the United States, and China in order to address the multiply connected crises now confronting the world, from pandemic disease to famine to war, and also the increasing threat of global warfare, possibly through strategic miscalculation. So we're happy to have convened today's conference. That last matter, the matter of the danger of war, is of particular note. And we are here to talk about something in specific, and it is this. If it were shown using competent forensic methods that there is no actual proof of Russian interference in the 2016 elections by means of a Russian computer hack of the Democratic National Committee, if it were shown that it has always been knowable to the intelligence agencies of the United States and of Great Britain that no such hack ever occurred, and if it were shown that though there was a request by the President of the United States to have the analysts that have successively refuted that Russian hack story be interviewed, that their evidence then be presented to the President, and that that evidence, if proven true, be presented to the American people for their evaluation, so that justice could be done though the heavens fall. If that directive were not carried out, would that defiance of such a presidential directive in the pursuit of the truth constitute a crime against the United States, a crime against the nation of Russia, and against the pursuit of world peace and the avoidance of war? Remember these words from January 28, 2003? The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa. War with Iraq ensued, with well over 500,000 deaths. Was it true? British intelligence has now for years, in the person of Christopher Steele and several others, including Sir Richard Dearlove and others who have backed his charges at one point, insisted that Russia hacked the DNC. What is supposed to ensue from that charge? What is the President of the United States being requested to do if that charge were to stand? William Binney's team has demonstrated that what has been said to have occurred, the so-called Russian hack, could not physically have happened. His 30 years of work at the National Security Agency, his service to his country, has been in the interest of protecting not only American lives, but in so doing, protecting the lives of people all over the world. He wanted to deliver a message to the President and the American people, because that's his job. He was prevented from doing so. We are all assembled here today to give a good American an opportunity that should no longer be delayed, because justice too long delayed is justice denied. It's my pleasure to introduce a truly good American with a story to tell you, William Binney.
Thank you, Dennis. And thanks to having me here. Basically, the problem is that I can't seem to get the forensics evidence into a court or up into the mainstream of evidence for refuting Russiagate. The point is that we looked at, in the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, we have a bunch of technical people, including Kirk Beebe and I, and some others, and some affiliates that were in the UK who also joined the analysis process. And we were looking at the files posted by WikiLeaks, because the allegation from the beginning is that Russia hacked the DNC and gave the emails to WikiLeaks to publish, which they did, they published. So we looked at those emails to see if there was something there that might give us some idea of how the WikiLeaks got that data. Well, in all the 35,813 emails that they posted in 3 batches, one one downloaded according to last modified times on the 23rd of May, and another on the 25th of May, and one on the 26th of August of 2016. Now, all those files, all 35,813, had a last modified time that was rounded off to the to an even second. So they all ended up in even seconds. Now, if you know anything about data processing and data storage and things of that nature, there is a program that was quite common in the past using what's called FAT file formatting, file allocation table formatting, which is a process that when doing a batch process of data and transferring it to a storage device like a thumb drive or a CD-ROM, it rounds off the last modified time to the nearest even second. So that's exactly the property we found in all that data posted by WikiLeaks. Now that said, very simply, this data was downloaded to a storage device, a CD-ROM or a thumb drive, and physically transported before WikiLeaks could post it. So that meant it was not a hack. So no matter how you look at it, we're looking at the forensic evidence that says the DNC emails were not hacked. They were downloaded and physically transported to WikiLeaks. And then we had the other issue with Guccifer 2. Now, Guccifer 2 came out shortly after, Julian Assange announced that he had emails on Hillary Clinton and so on, and the DNC. Well, when you looked at the material that, which we did, looked at all the material that Guccifer 2 posted and said, here are the hacks that I did on the DNC. He claimed he did one on the 5th of July and one on the 1st of September of 2016. Well, when you start looking at that, and we looked at the files he posted, gave you a series of files with file names, the numbers of characters in the file, and a timestamp at the end of the file. Then the next file, number of characters, and timestamp, and so on for I don't know how many files, thousands of files. So we looked at all those files and said, okay, we ran a program to calculate the transfer rate of all that data, because all you have to do is look at between the two timestamps, the file name and the number of characters in the file, and take the difference between the times, and that's the transfer rate for that number of characters. So we found that the variations ran from something like 19 to 49.1 megabytes per second. Now that means 19 to 49 million characters per second. And that we said the international web would, and the World Wide Web would not support that rate of transfer. Not for anybody who's just a hacker coming in across the net trying to do it. It won't support that kind of transfer. And some people thought we couldn't, that was wrong, that it could be done. And so we said, okay, we're going to try it. So we got organized some hackers in Europe to try to transfer a data set from the US over to Europe just to see how fast we could get it there. And we tried it from Albania and Serbia, a couple places in the Netherlands and London, data center. Well, we got various rates, but the highest rate we got was between the data center in New Jersey and one in London, and that was 49.1 megabytes per second, or 12 megabytes per second, which is 1/4 the rate, little less than 1/4 the rate necessary to do the transfer at the highest rate that we saw in the Guccifer 2 data, which meant it didn't go across the net. So in fact, the file rate transfers were nowhere near the maximum rate that we could do. And so we said, okay, if anybody has a way of getting it there, let us know and we'll help you try to do that. And so far, no one has ever come forward to dispute either the facts on the DNC data, last file, modified file times, nor the transfer rates for the Guccifer 2. Plus, there's another factor. With Guccifer 2, there's two more. With the Guccifer 2 data, the first of the 5 July data and the 1 September data, if you ignored date and hour, they could merge like you're shuffling a deck of cards. The holes in the 5 July data timing were filled by data from the 1st of September. That said to us that Guccifer 2 was playing with the data, separating into two files, saying he made two different hacks and doing a range change on the date and the hour on the one file. So that to us was also an indication of fabrication on the part of Guccifer 2. Then there was another factor. When Guccifer 2 put out some files on 15 June, of 2016 with the signatures of saying it's a Russian hack. Our fellows in the UK looking at the data found 5 of those files at a minimum. I don't know that it's through yet looking, but they found 5 files that Gusser 2 posted on the 15th of June with Russian signatures saying the Russians did this because of the signature. They found the same 5 files posted by WikiLeaks from a Podesta emails, and they did not have the Russian signatures. So that meant Gusser 2 was inserting Russian signatures to make it look like the Russians did the hack. Well, if you go back to the Vault 7 release from WikiLeaks again, from CIA, and you look, they have this Marble Framework program that will modify files to look like someone else did the hack, and who were the countries that they had the ability to do that in the Marble Framework program? Well, one was Russia, the other was China, North Korea, Iran, and Arab countries. Well, to us, then that means that the fabrication of the insert of Russian signatures means that somebody modified the file to make it look like it, which fits the Marble Framework definition of doing that kind of activity, which says all of this Gusser 2 material is pointing back now to CIA as the origin of it. That's the basic evidence we have, and none of it points to Russia. In fact, we can't even find anything that points to Russia. When in fact the Mueller indictment or the Mueller report and that Rosenstein indictment named some what they called trolls for the Russian government, the IRA, the Internet Research Agency out of St. Petersburg in Russia. They named it in a court document. And well, the IRA over in there said we are not in any way associated with the Russian government. So they sent lawyers in to challenge that in the court of law here in the US. And the court charged the government to prove it. And they couldn't even prove anything. And so the judge basically reprimanded them and said, you are never to mention the IRA as any way affiliated with the Russian government again. So their whole case was falling apart. Everything looked like the Gusser 2 data was a fabrication, the alleged hack and so on, all fabrications. And even if you look at some of the testimony that came out from the CrowdStrike CEO, I think his name is Sean Hannity, he said we had no indications of exfiltrating the data, but we had evidence that it was exfiltrated. Now, if he's talking about the last modified times as an indication of exfiltration, which it was, but it wasn't from a hack, it was from a download. So that download then is an indication that it was done locally, as were the Gusser 2 data. They couldn't go across the net. It was a download locally. All that stuff happened locally. In fact, some of the data in the Gusser 2 material had all the timestamps indicating it was done on the east coast of the United States. We had one in the central time and one on the west coast, but most of them fell on the east coast. So it implied that all this stuff was happening on the east coast, and that really pointed right back at CIA as the origin of all this fabrication.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. And so everybody knows, I know we've already gotten various requests for questions. There is going to be a time for people to ask questions, and we'll extend that as long as we can do that in this format. I next want to introduce Barbara Boyd, who's an author and researcher for the LaRouche Political Action Committee. I want to say something about this. 37 years ago, Lyndon LaRouche was involved in a back-channel negotiation with the Soviet Union. The discussion led to a policy being adopted by the Reagan administration called the Strategic Defense Initiative. Now, despite the fact that the senior director of the National Security Council, Norman Bailey, at that time, had met with LaRouche and had described LaRouche's organization as one of the best private intelligence services in the world, shortly after that policy was adopted, LaRouche was put through a fierce federal investigative process by the same Department of Justice. And U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark described that prosecution as a broader range of deliberate and systematic misconduct and abuse of power over a longer period of time in an effort to destroy a political movement and leader than any other federal prosecution in my time or to my knowledge. Now, that might not be pertinent to you today, except for one fact. One of the key persons involved in that prosecution at that time was a man by the name of Robert Mueller. Barbara Boyd is an author of a document called Robert Mueller is an Amoral Legal Assassin. He will do his job if you let him. Barbara?
Well, with that introduction, let me just highlight some of the things Bill said and some of the things which I think are really significant for our audience today. Here we are in this summer, which you could call the summer of our discontent, so to speak. Our cities are aflame. We have a COVID crisis, a pandemic. And yet, here we are, and we keep coming back to something which happened in the summer of 2016, and we keep pointing to it and saying, this is what you have to really look at. And the reason for that is simple. Once you go through something like this, I assume that General Flynn feels something like this right now. The LaRouche prosecution was like this. Roger Stone has just been through something like this, where the apparatus of government is aligned against you and your reputation is torn to shreds, and you're accused of all sorts of things, just like the president has been accused right now, which are a lie. It's very rare that you actually get the chance to come back on it and you actually can dissect it and show what the lie is. And this particular lie, that Russia hacked the DNC, has been the sort of untouchable thing which nobody has wanted to actually get into around the Russiagate sort of investigation. You see that we're all satisfied with tearing apart Christopher Steele, the British agent who fabricated the dirty dossier in several directions. We're not really satisfied at looking at this particular situation. Just think about it, all the things that have interceded ever since the summer of 2016. Think about what was the content of what was in those WikiLeaks leaks. Can you remember what was actually said in the actual documents? Or is your mind somehow transfixed in an argument about whether Donald Trump is an agent of Putin or not? So, basically what's happened here is that the VIPs from December of, from December of 2016 really have been yelling about this and saying, this makes no sense. Think back to December of 2016, what was happening? The Obama administration had declared that this was an act of war by Russia. John McCain was running around saying we should invoke Article 5 of NATO. We should go to war over this. Barack Obama says, or has claimed, that the Obama administration, as a retaliation for this, put a cyber worm into Russian infrastructure, which is probably, by most accounts, an actual act of war. Bill Binney said from the beginning, if there was a Russian hack, the NSA would have it. Where's the evidence? It has never been produced. And then come May of this year, we finally get to look at what the congressional testimony was about this way back in 2017. That is before Robert Mueller. That is before the continuation of this lie for over 2.5 years, and the beginning of this lie being sort of, again, transfixed right now into the same type of hacking lie about China. We only learned what Sean Hannity said, that the only people other than Bill Binney who actually forensically examined this to any extent, and whether CrowdStrike examined this is a very open question. But what did he say? He told the Congress way back in December of 2017, we couldn't see any evidence that files which had been quote unquote staged for exfiltration ever were exfiltrated. They never left the DNC as far as we could find it. Think about that. That is May of 2020. We're just finding out what everybody in Congress and everybody in Washington knew definitively as of December of 2017. Barack Obama, Joe Biden, those guys knew this even before, obviously, the congressional testimony of CrowdStrike's expert. So what did those emails also actually show? Most people have forgotten completely about that. They showed that Hillary Clinton was stealing the Democratic nomination for president from Bernie Sanders. They showed that Hillary Clinton was a craven tool of Wall Street. Most people don't even remember that. Now think about the fact that Donald Trump comes in, he goes through all of the things he goes through, and he says to Mike Pompeo, who is then at the CIA, I want you to meet with this guy Binney, and I want you to find out about the Russian hacks. What happens is Pompeo does meet with Bill Binney. Bill Binney tells him everything you just heard and probably more. And because of the fact of what Bill Binney said, it is just as likely that the CIA did the hacking of the DNC or did whatever intrusion was involved there. This thing has been completely, totally covered up. It is an untouchable in Washington parlance. So what we're contending is that any investigation which does not attack this and expose it is rotten and self-defeating. It will leave the surveillance apparatus and the intelligence apparatus in place, which we contend has left many Americans just mentally imprisoned and pacified since 9/11, and particularly since the financial collapse of 2008. That is why Julian Assange, who was a witness to this, may very well die in a Belmarsh prison as a result of the cover-up of this very crime. It's why Craig Murray, who was a witness to the actual handoff, at least according to what he says, has never ever been interviewed by any government agency in terms of what he has to say about the so-called Russian hack. That's why the surveillance state, which is really the imposition of a complete police state in the United States, which Bill Binney and Kurt have opposed ever since September 11, 2001, might very well be imposed completely, which after all was what Hillary Clinton's mission was supposed to be in her presidency, going forward from the continuance and expansion of this type of surveillance during the Obama administration after its initial widespread implementation in the Bush administration. But it's also why, if this particular lie gets exposed, gets dug into, we have a good chance to overturn the entire horrible apparatus meant to subdue a population in a failed United States, which is really what the British oligarchy has planned here, why that descent into the maelstrom can finally be halted. And that's what I have to say.
Okay. Thank you very much, Barbara. Now, Bill has a team that he works with, and he's worked with them for a while, and one of the members of that team is with us here. And he, that is Mr. Kirk Wiebe, and Bill have a story that goes back a way. They at one point decided that they had to leave NSA, and they had to do that in order to do their job. And I just like Kirk to say something, and then we'll open up the lines for the questions. And let me just say to everybody, that if you are on the Zoom platform, you just raise your hand. I think you have a direction for that, *9, I believe, or something. And then we'll get to you. And we have also written questions, so there'll be a couple of us asking those questions. So, Kirk?
Yes. Hello. My name is Kirk Wiebe. I'm a longtime colleague, friend of Bill Binney's. And we've been through a few wars together, some adversarial actions taken against us by the U.S. government. Thank God we survived those. But I want you, the audience, to understand the background for Russiagate and some of the things that have happened, especially the misuse, the illegal use of United States government surveillance capabilities against Donald Trump, as alleged, and other people connected to his administration. And that alludes to the fact that Bill is the part of several affidavits in court cases, one associated with Roger Stone, who was just pardoned or had his sentence commuted by the president, but was not allowed to testify in court. And I believe I can tell you why. But you need to understand, in the context of the last 20 years, what has brought about this situation that makes it possible for people to misuse or illegally use against us, all of you, very, very powerful surveillance capabilities. When NSA and Bill and I were researching the evolution of communications capabilities in the 90s, basically this is around 1995, 1996, 97 timeframe, it became clear that this thing called the internet was gaining ground and it was advancing quickly. All kinds of applications, those little icons you find on your computer, your phone, whatever it may be, were flourishing. New means of interacting between people were being developed almost overnight. And the end result is we are all very wired people. Many of us have more than one phone in our families, multiple computers. Now your refrigerator is even being connected to the internet. Well, there are very positive things about all of this, but there are some negatives. It means if people can crawl up a wire, which is basically what the internet is, speaking figuratively, they can access your phone, they can access your computer, they could access your refrigerator. Now, why would you do this? Well, you want to surveil. You know, back when the United States was fighting for its independence, the King of England wanted to put a soldier in the home of every colonial resident. Why? So that he could monitor and surveil the mood of the colonial structure, those oddballs living in the United States that he wanted to keep under control. And this is one of the factors that led to the United States Revolution against England. People want privacy. That ultimately gets reflected in our Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, in Article 4 of the Bill of Rights. And we believe, Bill and I, raised under the Constitution and sworn to defend it, that that right should be extended to the general population of the world. In other words, why would you want to spy on innocent people? Why? There's no need to. It's hard enough to catch bad guys. Why complicate things? So when Bill and I were working on ways for NSA to exploit or use the internet to catch terrorists, identify people planning to bomb things, whatever it may be, we made sure we built in protections for innocent people. Now, the thing that allows you to do that is the technical makeup of the internet. Things just don't fly around in the free space. Just like you have a phone number that is equated to you as a person, or an email address or anything like that. The internet functions on the same principle. There are IP addresses, Internet Protocol, IP, that are associated with every communications device you own. And it's monitored, and it can be monitored. We use that information to exclude anyone that did not fit the definition of being a terrorist or a known bad person or someone under active suspicion of being a part of a terrorist or criminal organization. So we had a way of separating out the wheat from the chaff, if you will. Unfortunately, Bill Binney was ordered in one night and told to remove that safeguard. And ever since, NSA's been on a rampant surveillance exercise, collecting everything it can about everyone. Is it literally everything? No, but it's so much that the odds are, if they want to know about you, they can know about you. This was everything against the principle of privacy under the United States Constitution, but they didn't care. The ability to do it was too seductive. And this is how mankind goes wrong. They always tend to screw things up, and they did here. If Bill Binney's protections had been built into NSA surveillance programs 20 years ago, we would not be even talking about surveillance and FISA and all of these words you're hearing being used against the Trump administration. People wouldn't have been able to surveil innocent people. But the government made a conscious choice not to build that in. And they don't want you to know that. They don't want a national uproar. They don't want a global uproar, that it's all fixable with a simple couple steps. This is not hard to do. You just need the will to do it. And so that's the backdrop against all of this that I just wanted to pass along and make sure you understood.
Okay, thank you very much. Now what we're going to do is we are getting a lot of questions. A lot of different things have happened. We want to welcome everybody that has joined us. We're very happy that some of the people get the idea that this is a day to begin to actually make sure everything gets exposed, that all the trees in the forest fall, and all those things that are often said but rarely done. What we're going to do is we're going to go to a written question, and my colleague Diane Sayre is going to do that. And I'll be handling some of the other questions that are coming in. So if Diane is there, great. Let's go to you first. You seem to be muted.
Now, okay, now you can hear me.
Right.
Good. All right,
Yep.
so the first question is from Sonia with Free Syria. A couple questions. She writes, recently I wrote 2 articles about the Ukrainian state-funded hackers. According to a defector of the Ukrainian Secret Service, the recent hacks over the last years, where Russia was blamed from the Skripal case until the UK election meddling, were performed by Ukrainian hackers, paid for by the EU and US under the guidance of Stratcom and MI5 and 6, he said. The Ukrainian hackers use Russian IP addresses to infiltrate. The biggest evidence was the Burisma case, where Joe Biden, his son, was a shareholder. So the hacks we have seen lately are from the EU and, of course, the UK, MI5 and 6, most likely against their own governments. Would this be the explanation as well that the Democrats are performing a coup or a colored revolution against Trump? Has Ukraine become the largest spy country and therefore had to become part of the EU?
So who would like to take it? Bill?
Well, I can give some thoughts on that. That kind of scenario fits right in with the U.S. government attempting, the organizations within the government, the CIA, FBI, and NSA, State Department, and DHS, trying to perform a coup here against President Trump, which is exactly what they were doing. We're not, that's very clear to us. There's no question about it. They all fabricated this evidence. They used Steele to fabricate other charges against him, to get warrants against him, to spy on his programs, to see what he's planning and doing, and then to try to manipulate data and fabricate data to make charges of Russia relationship between President Trump and Russia. This is all part of a planned coup. So, and foreign governments were involved with this. I think you'll notice that Durham and Barr have been investigating various other countries and going to talk to them about the participation in events that they were involved in. And I think you'll see, at least I hope, that Durham and Barr force this out in the open so the American public can actually see what really happened and know the corruption and evil that's been going on in our government. So, yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
Okay, fine. Anybody want to add anything? Okay, let's move to the Zoom platform. I don't know who's there at the moment.
Hello, this is Ann Vandersteel. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Go right ahead.
Okay, great. My question is very direct, and it has to do with the CIA. And I guess I can either pass this to either Ms. Boyd or Mr. Binney. But with respect to the current leadership over there, Gina Haspel, is she aware of this? If you've spoken to Pompeo, is Gina Haspel aware? And if so, why is she not doing anything? And why hasn't Ray been contacted about this to see if there's some initiatives that can come from that department?
Shall I take that one? I think what's going on, and nice to talk to you, Ann.
Good to talk to you too again, Bill. You're looking good.
Well, yeah. The problem is that there's so much involvement across the government in various departments that they all have to cover up for one another in the event that when one falls, they all start to fall, and that's what they're afraid of. So this is basically a cover up and obstruction of justice and so on, whatever you want to call it. There's many crimes you could put to this. Okay. Actually, criminal. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I've already done it. I have a list of crimes that they've been committing. This is all consistent with the continued cover up to make sure that everybody that's involved in this coup attempt and the manipulation and changing and sedition against our government basically is kept hidden, and they're not going to be able to do that because there's just too many people who know what's really going on or have a piece of it anyway.
Okay, Barbara, you have anything to add?
Yeah, Gina Haspel was actually functioning out of London during the entire run-up to the 2016 coup. And since most everything that happened actually was part of a British intelligence operation, one of the ironies which is just coming across in the press today is that Mike Pompeo, the guy who's blocking this, was just over in London trying to foment all sorts of stuff against the Chinese. And he just had a sort of celebratory walk around the park with Sir Richard Dearlove and the Circle in London, which was actually promoting Christopher Steele and promoting all of the actions against the president. So while she may be, she's certainly privy to what happened. And again, the issue really is, why is this so hot to handle? And what Bill said is absolutely true. Once one peg starts to fall here, all of the trees in the forest, since this is really foundational to everything that's happened to this country since 2016, everything starts to come down. And that's why, Christopher Wray is not going to do a whole lot about this. At least he appears to be playing a real blocking role in this whole thing. And you got to hope that essentially through people, there's a situation right now in the country where people get very tied up in, will Bill Barr and John Durham do the right thing by the president? And can we wait for that? And is there going to be a report, or is there going to be indictments? And the latest thing gets released and it turns out to be just an iteration of things we already know. And the question is, really, will the citizens, demand that this be exposed? There's an election going on. Every single vote in this election is going to count. If people actually go to it about this and say, my vote depends on actually revealing everything that's happened in this coup attempt in the United States. My vote will actually go to, the people who actually will get behind that. The biggest block to a lot of this stuff is in the Congress and in the Senate. Then you're going to begin to see the thing turn around, but you're not going to see it from inside because the inside is too invested and too dirtied up already for the most part in the coup itself.
Okay, I think
Yeah,
Ann has a. Is that right? Oh well, Kirk, you go
Yeah.
first, and then I can answer.
I was just going to sum up what Bill and Barbara said as passive complicity. There's a protection of the establishment going on and the structure of the government. I think a lot of it is driven by fear that the whole system could blow up, and then we'd have to start from scratch. I think there's some truth to that, but I wouldn't be afraid of it. We need a house cleansing, and there's very few elements of government that are not guilty in being passively complicit.
Okay,
Okay,
my
Ann.
follow-up question then might be in terms of exposing this more in a federal court is, has anybody explored the idea of a Bivens action where you actually sue federal individuals personally in federal courts and name each person that is aware of the crime and hold them accountable if they've done nothing?
Well, I've got several court actions going. One, I put an affidavit into Roger Stone's case, and also an affidavit in General Flynn's case. But I also have another lawsuit going forward in the Third Circuit with L.A. Chukart, a lawyer, and I've been working together to sue the government basically for violations of the Fourth Amendment and collecting bulk acquisition of data on everybody, and in violation with the First, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments of the Constitution. And I included exhibits from Edward Snowden's releases, which clearly show the programs that I left NSA when I retired. Those programs were all done by us in the SARC, in the SIGINT Automation Research Center. And it's what they've done is they took what we did there and applied it to the entire NSA operation, including relationships with other parties and so on. They took exactly our blueprint, our layout, everything was right there, and they simply expanded it to do everything. So, I was ready to testify to all of that, and that's in the Third Circuit, and it's still going. And now we're preparing an appeal to the Supreme Court, which should be filed this Friday or next week sometime.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So Diane, we go back to you, and then I've got a couple of written things too, but we'll go to you first.
Okay, well, first, let me just say we got a note from Joe Hoft from the Gateway Pundit, who writes, as I was attempting to post on this live stream, Bill Binney says more evidence CIA involved in DNC hack than Russia. And boom, our site went down. The Gateway Pundit, we sometimes get more than 2 million hits a day. And he sent another note saying that they are still down, just in case anyone wonders if people are listening to this. Now I have a question from Aaron Seraphim Hanish, who's with the Duran. I'm going to just take a couple of these questions, it's several, who writes, I live in the Russian Federation and the country has suffered from sanction after sanction since before President Trump's election, but also continuing during it. If the Russiagate story is indeed the hoax you say, and I agree that it is, then what do you think accounts for the imposition of these very painful sanctions? 2, what in your estimation would it take happening in the United States for these sanctions to be lifted and relations between Russia and the US normalized? He asks, finally, how important do you believe it is that President Trump wins re-election this fall?
Okay, let me do something here. I think that that's absolutely right. And the reason these sanctions were implied were basically they had to create a fabricated story that Russia was they had to create an external threat to the U.S. and the only one that looked like the most likely candidate that would be accepted by the U.S. population in general was Russia because of the residue of the Cold War thinking and so on. And so they did that as a way of saying, well, if you're going to blame them for the problem, you have to do something. Otherwise, you look, meek and mild and ineffective. So they had to do something. So they started these sanctions. They didn't want to go to war, obviously, but these kinds of things can eventually create situations that could accidentally do that. So, but that was the reason I think they did that. And yeah, the reason and the way to stop this and reverse this is first of all to re-elect President Trump, but also then to put the people who fabricated this story in jail for the crimes they've committed. That will start to stop this kind of crap in our government.
So we're getting several questions. This is good. I'm glad we're getting so many. So one of the things they asked me to do, and we should go to the Zoom platform next, but while we're doing that, just that people should raise their hands on that platform if they wish to say something. I've gotten a couple of requests to recognize various people, but I think they're in the platform, and the best thing for them to do is to say something. Otherwise, I will, I suppose, say hello. I'd like to say one thing is I'd like to recognize Ed Loomis and Diane Rourke, and also Tom Drake, for that matter, who are other members of the team who had the honor of being visited by various Department of Justice operatives in the aftermath of their having also protested these illegal activities. So now what we want to do is to go back to the Zoom platform. Are we ready? Okay, whoever is next in line, you must unmute your phone. And if not, I guess we would go to the next person in the platform.
Hello, can I be heard?
Yes.
Great. All right. Hi, everybody. This is Jose Vega here in the Bronx. It's always a pleasure to hear everyone on this panel. My question is very simple, and also thank you again for reiterating the evidence that there was never a Russian hack. And you've been saying this since 2017, and I think it's absurd that it's been 3 years now, almost 3 years. Yeah, 3 years now that people are only now starting to really listen. But regardless, how does freeing the president from this tangle of the Russiagate and finally putting the nail in the coffin to it, how will this allow the president to operate and operate differently or operate in a different circumstance? What will this do not just for Trump, but also for the presidency in the future, for whoever may hold that office? And what kind of president does it set?
Go ahead, Bill. You want me to? Okay, I'll do it.
Sure.
Well, to me, it sets the precedent that, it sets a precedent of bringing our government back into a constitutional republic. And that will set up the basis to make sure if they send these people to jail, the ones who committed this fabrication and all the sedition involved in the government organizations getting together and conspiring against the duly elected president. So if my real feeling and sense is that the Democrats should really pay a heavy penalty, not just in the voting for the president, but also in the voting for the House and Senate members, because they've been participating in this fabrication and are accessories, all of them. So they need to know that, and they need to pay a penalty for it. The U.S. public needs to make sure that if they want honesty from their government and some kind of constitutional republic, they better do something like that to send a message to the Democrats to straighten up their act and get back into the game of being a republic, where you have two parties that maybe argue with one another about policy, but they don't try to subvert collections and perform coups against one another. So I mean, my point is that once that happens, that will restore the republic, and the republic itself, then the constitutional republic that we supposedly have, and the rules that we operate under will function, and I think they'll do a much better job, and it'll be much better for the U.S. population of the United States government, the United States country, just to have the government that functions under that Constitution.
And if I
Okay.
might add to what Bill just said, it's not going to be easy, Jose. By the way, hello. And it's going to be it's a monumental task, because it seems all three branches of our government have been tainted in one way or another. All three. And we've had a Congress sitting there who will tell you their job is to do oversight over the other branches, especially the executive branch. But this lawless surveillance has occurred on their watch. So it's not just what the president does, it's what the director of national intelligence does, and what set of ethics and principles Ratcliffe, brings to the table. But that's equally true of the members of Congress, especially those doing oversight, which I think are all 435 of them, since they represent districts in this United States. And I think we could all agree we all cherish privacy, freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, etc., under the Constitution. There's none of those rights we would give up. None. And so I think this is not an easy fix, but it's one that needs to start. And I would dare say, I would like to hold every member of government responsible to fulfill their oath of office. The one that says, I will defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And if there's evidence they have not done that, they should be prosecuted or impeached or otherwise removed from office.
Okay, we're going back to Diane.
There's three similar questions, which I'm going to combine. One of which of the three is from the Association of Comptroller Workers of Columbia, a trade union there, but there's others that are related. On the question of China, this person says, now that the facts have come out allowing us to infer there was collusion to involve Trump with Russia, I'd like you to elaborate on the Chinese flank. Who is interested in sabotaging diplomatic relations, and what is their intention? Others have brought up the abrupt closing of the Chinese consulate in Houston. And I think Barbara mentioned something earlier about Pompeo's visit to Britain. So that's the question.
Barbara?
Yeah.
Okay. Look, this all goes back to the whole issue which we're talking about here. We're talking about an administrative state which is actually functioning, increasingly strengthened from 2001 forward, which is functioning almost in contradiction to anything a president tries to do. And with respect to both Russia and China, the grounds for the present quote unquote whole of government nonsense, which we see going on, were laid in the Defense Authorization Act of 2017-2018, written by Joseph Dunford. And what you have to recognize here, going back to what we've been talking about in terms of what's at stake is you have to recognize that there's been this whole apparatus built up where the money flows and the power flows and everything else. The NDAA sets the Pentagon strategic priorities. It also awards all of the money to the largely privatized intelligence apparatus, which has grown up like a foul, parasite after 9/11. It also awards Congress. Just think about what, Chuck Schumer famously said to Rachel Maddow at the beginning of the Trump presidency. Why is the president being so stupid as to go after the intelligence community? They can get you 6 ways from Sunday. That's someone speaking who's already corrupted, warning about what is fairly obvious in terms of United States policy, which is that what Dwight Eisenhower referred to as the military-industrial complex is a real thing. And President Trump's election as an outsider, really for the first time since John F. Kennedy, threatened that. The entire coup distorts the ability of any president to actually act within these circumstances. And it's why, if you're going to solve any of these geopolitical problems, you have to end the coup first. You have to go after it. You have to prosecute it. You have to put the people who are actually really behind the thing in jail.
Okay, very good. I'm trying to figure out, okay, we've got a couple of different things. First of all, let me just indicate, because there are three people who've asked the question, which is sort of, I'm going to try to combine. This comes from 3 different persons, but it goes like this. This is directed to Bill. You stated, and this is from, I think, from the press release that went out before, that your thin thread system would have in real time found the plot that became 9/11. Could you discuss this and your conclusion that the system was taken down because it would have also captured the criminal activity of the intelligence community?
Yep.
That basically is what the question is. So go ahead.
Okay. What we had in terms of the program ThinThread is what he's talking about. That was a program we were developing inside NSA to basically take care of and manage the digital age and the explosion of communications in digital form across the World Wide Web, digital, the cell phones and so on exploding, all those communications. So we did it 3 basic ways. I mean, we're looking at the mass of data. The question is, how can you find something in a massive flow of information that's important for your analysts to look at? And if you start trying to look at all the data, which is what they're doing now, you get immediately buried in all kinds of information. You can't see threats in that massive amounts of data. So we devised 3 different ways of looking at it. First, we call deductive, meaning you build social networks of everybody in the world. A calls B, A emails B, A sends money to B, A travels to B, so on. Those kinds of relationships, and you build those things for everybody in the world. Then if for example, a bad guy, somebody who's involved in Al-Qaeda or some other dope activity or some dope kingpin or something, then you look at his network and see who he's connected with in that network, whatever domain you're in, whether it's the phones or the emails or the financial transactions or whichever, and you see the relationships there at what we call the first degree. Then you look at the second degree, because if you have a front company involved, he's talking to a front company, then you need to look further, the next hop, to see who it is. But the rule is you don't use, and the rule we were using, of course, because if you don't, you get buried in data, and I'll explain that in a minute. You don't use a company or a government agency to look through for the second hop, because if you do, you're just pulling in random people that are contacting that government agency or that company, for a business or some function they needed fulfilled. So, I mean, for example, if I emailed Google, the first hop was to Google, and the second hop goes out to Google, maybe 1.5 billion people every day. So the point is that over the very few days, you could collect the basic through two hops. You could say, now I'm going to be looking at everybody that has a communications device in the world, which is probably on the order of 4+ billion people. So that's the idea of, and we tried to get that instilled in the January 2014. President Obama tried to put limits on NSA and that what they were looking at, and he said you can only go 2 hops. Well, he didn't have that limitation in, and NSA was very happy with that because they could therefore use the Google relationship or any other company relationship to say, well, we now have the authority to spy on everybody in the world. So you see, that kind of thing would narrow it down. You wouldn't be pulling in massive numbers of people who had no relationship whatsoever to somebody who might be doing a bad thing. That we called then the zone of suspicion. If you were around a known terrorist or bad guy for criminal activity or so on, if you were in that zone, you then would be looked at. And the other one we had was an inductive way. If you were, for example, using a cell phone in the jungles of Peru or Bolivia or, in Venezuela, or if you were using something like that, a satellite phone or something like that in the mountains of Pakistan on the Afghani border or something like that, that was a reasonable property that was common among criminals and terrorists. So you would then fall in under that. You had no direct connection with them, but you were at properties that were looking like you might be a part of it. So then you had to be looked at for that one. And then we had a final one, which the first two really would have covered every terrorist attack from before and after 9/11, as well as 9/11. It's not just limited to 9/11. It's any kind of terrorist activity or criminal activity is recorded that way, and you can get to it by those two principles. And the final one we had, which was to develop things to get started where you know absolutely nothing about the network except maybe geographic relationships or things of that nature. For example, then if you said, okay, here are the countries that are quite really involved in a lot of dope smuggling, or here are the ones that are involved in exporting terrorism or so on, then you looked at all the first degree hops of every node, every person, every relationship in the world. And you could do this with software. It's not a great, that's not really, people, you may think it's impossible, but it's really not that hard at all. And then you start looking and see what is the distribution of the first degree of every network in the world. And is it consistent or mostly 80% within the zones defined for terrorism or dope smuggling or so on? And if it is, then you say, well, this is a reasonable suspicion for us to look at them. That's starting out with knowing absolutely nothing except geographical distribution. And you easily know that from the phone numbers themselves. They're all set up geographically and worldwide. It's a worldwide plan. And the same is true with the internet protocols, IPv4 and IPv6. Those are block allocations out of the IANA and the distribution of those kinds of numbers, and you know exactly where the blocks are. So that tells you at least the geography of stuff. So you can use those kinds of things to do that. And what that means is you're looking at the metadata of the communications. You're not actually looking at the content, which means you now can make massive communications a doable thing and a manageable problem for analysts to actually have a rich environment to try to succeed at stopping things. That's the way we operated from the front to the back. And in the back end, then the process we had with the ThinThread was once we pulled data in, if you were not known to be a bad guy and we didn't know for sure that you were, we would encrypt all your attributes so no one, even in NSA, they couldn't tell who they were. So they couldn't do anything like look at their lovers to see if they're cheating on, which is what they did according to the FISA court stuff. So that allowed us to give everybody privacy. Even if you were in the zone of suspicion, you still got privacy. So, and until we could prove that you were part of it, we would keep you protected by encryption. But in the end, then, after that, we also put in a program that monitored the entire network that we had. And we wanted to actively push that out to the NSA network worldwide, in fact, to all of government eventually. But what it did was monitor the network to see who did what, where, when, and how long they stayed, things like that in the different files and so on, and what they did with the data. And so that was the program that they didn't want, because what it would do was also show every relationship for all the criminals we have in government and what they're doing. And when it came to things like Edward Snowden, if they had that program, which they didn't want because they knew it would expose all the corruption and moving of money around and all of that. So they basically eliminated all those things that we put in there and just took in the bulk acquisition because we could see it all. So that was what they did to the program. It made the program ineffective. It made their entire staff mostly dysfunctional because they're buried in data and they can't see a lot. And even internally, Edward Snowden produced the documents where their analysts were saying that, and they still didn't listen. They're still doing the same idiotic approach. At any rate, those were the things they removed, and those are the ways that it was succeeding, and we could manage it. It produced a manageable amount of data for our 6,000 analysts that were looking at the data at the time. So we basically were made dysfunctional by the general approach of collecting data on everyone, because they wanted to have power and control, be able to control everybody's activities. So that was a basic violation of the Fourth Amendment, and then they used that data, FBI and CIA and DIA and all those intelligence agencies, including the Drug Enforcement Administration and the FBI primarily, those two, looking internally at NSA data to find criminal activity and then use it to go arrest people, then fabricate the evidence and substitute that for the NSA data because it's not admissible in the court because it wasn't collected with a warrant. And so they called that parallel construction, and that meant that they were perjuring themselves in all the criminal activities in court that they used that data for. So there was that, and then of course the other problem is that those data sets in NSA are directly accessible through the IC Reach program by the Five Eyes countries. GCHQ, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. So they're connected directly in, as are the FBI and the DEA. And this is all done without any oversight. Nobody's really overseeing this. You hear about all the oversights about NSA analysts. That's a red herring. They're not looking at the entire access of that data. That's the problem. And the real problem is NSA collects that data to begin with and stores it. So if they didn't have that data, they wouldn't be able to abuse it like they did against President Trump and all the Republicans and so on, and anybody else in the Tea Party. They used it there. The IRS has access to that through the Special Operations Division and the Drug Enforcement Administration. They go into that data too. So they could see all the relationships of the Tea Party and so on, and anybody trying to get a 501c3 with the Tea Party, including religious groups or any kind of group. They could see that relationship, and that's why they slow rolled them, and that's how they did it. So all of this, the point is that if you say if they used our approach, they wouldn't have the ability to abuse people. They wouldn't have the ability to have their own analysts look into the data to see if their lovers were cheating on them, which is what they did. So, I mean, that tells you the extent of what's going on. It's all local phone calls and local emails and so on. Chatter, what have you, it's all there. And and the point is, they shouldn't be having that data to begin with. It's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. It's also and also a violation of the First Amendment because they don't have free association, not free anymore without the government knowing it. So or having access to retroactively analyze it. So which is what they do also. So all of this needs to be stopped. And they need to revert to a disciplined, professional, focused approach of using the rules that we presented to get data and get a rich environment for analysts and FBI agents and DEA agents to actually succeed. Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick add-on to what Bill's saying. If you listen to what Bill just said, the solution is to take metadata-based analysis and put sunlight on it. In other words, make it a routine, just like we do normal police investigations. The Russians know about how to surveil the internet. The Chinese know. You're not going to give any secrets away. You simply are shining what is now a dark, murky, smoke-filled room process with special courts and moving it into the Article 3 courts where metadata-based relationships can be offered as evidence in a court of law, a normal court of law, Article 3 court, and proceed from that premise. That doesn't mean you have to give the public all the information. You just simply begin to establish a more normalized method of justice under our Constitution and get it out of the special control of what has become a politicized weapon using our surveillance capabilities.
Okay, good. Dennis has had some technical difficulties, but the next questioner from Zoom is Alejandra Carvajal. Alejandra? There we go. Alejandra, can you hear us?
Hola, hola. Hola, hola. ¿Me escucha?
Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're able to hear you.
Okay, Dennis is back.
Sí, había puesto una pregunta en el chat.
So I put a question in the chat. Once these evidence has been presented to show that the connection to Russia has been discredited, I'd like to know about the China question. Who are the people who are behind the China question, and what's their actual political intention?
We couldn't hear the translation, is that right?
Yeah, that may be the.
Hello, this is the interpreter. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? This is the interpreter.
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I'll repeat the question, which was okay. I believe it was actually asked previously, but read by one of the hosts. But the question was, since you have now shown and demonstrated that all of the information regarding to the Russiagate question is not true, can you please talk about the question of China and who would be behind this kind of an attack and on U.S. relations with China, and what is their actual intention?
Was that question not answered before? I thought. Well, go ahead, Kirk, if you have something to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have to admit, full disclosure, I am not intimate with the Chinese administration per se, but over the years, I have gotten the impression that the Chinese Communist Party is much like the Communist Party we found in the Soviet Union during the 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s. In other words, it hasn't evolved much. It is still a very strict party, an application of communist principles. And so I view it as very monolithic, very reluctant to give up centralized control. And so I think we can view the traditional model of communism when we interpret motives and things of that nature. I am not surprised about the Houston story and the consulate. We have known for years that communists and other foes use consulates, embassies as intelligence bases of operation. So there's nothing surprising here. It's how we deal with it that will make the difference. And I think the Trump administration's simple equation of if you subvert, if you break the law, if you do bad things to try to gain advantage in the global marketplace, we're going to retaliate. In other words, if you're a bad boy, we're going to treat you like a bad boy, but we're not going to cause a war over it. So I think it's sort of a careful tit for tat, but very firm bit of behavior on our part to make sure the Chinese know clearly what we expect of them and hopefully they will reciprocate. But that's the question.
I think I understand that we're having a little bit of a confusion here about how we are proceeding in terms of the written and other questions. Diane, do you have another written question there? Can you go to that, please?
Yes. The question is, would it be possible for the panelists to discuss the dangers to freedom of speech and to state accountability and journalistic freedoms from the planned extradition of Julian Assange? Would they also comment on how this is intended to avoid scrutiny of war crimes?
I'd like to take that first, and then I'll invite other comment. Look, the First Amendment right now is under total assault in the United States. When Bill talked about coming back to the nature of a republic, you come back to what President Lincoln actually said in Gettysburg. Will a government of the people, by the people, and for the people actually survive? The First Amendment is critical to that. Now think about what's happened in the United States over the last 3-4 weeks, month, 2 months, where essentially campaigns have been run against personalities who express any form of dissent from what is considered to be the mainstream media lines on social policy of any sort. You can be canceled, as they say. You can have the experience that Jim Hoft just had of being taken off the internet. There is widespread, assaults on speech going on through Twitter and Google and Facebook at this point, all tied to the election. And that brings you back to really, again, why this particular thread in the entire investigation is so terribly important. What did Julian Assange do? He published the truth about Hillary Clinton. He published the truth about John Podesta. He published the truth about various intelligence operations conducted both by the British and by the United States, leading invariably to various forms of war crimes. Now, this guy, who is, after all, a key witness to what actually happened and what we're discussing, the so-called Russian hack of the DNC, the guy who actually got the documents, is being purposely left to die in the worst of all prisons, Belmarsh in London, in order to shut him up, period. Craig Murray, another essential witness to what actually happened, he says he actually got the thumb drives from somebody at American University in the summer of 2016, which resulted in the WikiLeaks documents. He right now, he says, at least by this morning's Consortium News, that he is being hounded by the CIA, that the CIA is absolutely obsessed with him. So the point here is very simple. Creative thought, creative republics, intellectual discourse depend upon free speech and free debate. And yet, here we are, allegedly criticizing China as a totalitarian society, while we tolerate a surveillance state and absolutely totalitarian measures against our own population right now. I think that we're at a very dangerous place where people have to go back and read their constitutions and really think about that Bill of Rights sitting there and think about what has happened to us over the course of the last summer and really understand that document, understand that that document setting up a form of government which never before had existed anywhere in the world is very much in danger. And Lincoln's words at Gettysburg should be ringing in everyone's ears.
Well said.
If I can add to what Barbara has already said, which I agree with totally. Doing this to Julian Assange is basically why the mainstream media is basically the mouthpiece for our government. They're all afraid to oppose it. They're all afraid to even investigate anything that would in any way implicate our government a crime. And that's true of the people working in government. They're so afraid to say anything because of this surveillance state. They would easily be detected. Okay, so, but it goes much further than that. What it is Julian Assange is not a U.S. citizen. He's a publisher of information. And what that says is there isn't any publisher in the world or anyone that's involved in publication of information that the U.S. government doesn't like that they can't take and indict anywhere in the world, and then bring them in for prosecution. So it's not just a threat to the free press here in the United States; it's a threat to free press in the world. And so it takes away, what I say is as long as our press agrees with this and goes along with this, they should be removed from the First Amendment, because that was supposed to give them protection, and they were supposed to be telling us, the people, what our government was doing. And right now, all they're doing is telling us what the story, what the government wants us to hear. So that's basically controlling. That's the one way you control thought and thinking in a country. You make sure that only the information you want to be known is known. And our mainstream media is making that possible for our government. And just as we heard earlier today, when they cut that fellow off from posting this broadcast, why that basically is a censorship. So it's a way of controlling the flow of information to people of the country, and so they can make up their own mind and have an informed electorate, so they can, when they make a vote for elections, that they do it in an informed way. So if you only inform people in a certain way and that's all they have a basis for making a decision to vote on, you're corrupting the entire process. And that's fundamentally what our people have been doing, and basically moving, as I said, to totalitarian police state.
Okay. All right. Okay. We're back on Zoom. Okay. Go ahead. Can you hear us? I'm seeing somebody on Zoom. Is he unmuted? We can't hear. You may be muted. International connection, looks like. We're not able to hear him. Maybe he's got to call back.
Now can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I'm Harley Schlanger. I have a question for Bill on the importance of the meeting that you had with Mike Pompeo. Given his recent adventures in London, where he's cavorting with the very people who were behind Russiagate, I think it's urgent that this be brought up. There are people who justify Pompeo doing nothing by saying, well, he had to cover it up so that the story would unfold and that the evidence would emerge, that it's part of a plan. If that's the plan, I would say it's a stupid plan because of all the damage that's been done. But secondly, people say, well, what could he have done? And Bill, I'd like you to take that up. Given that he was the CIA director when you met with him, what could he have done to expose the fraud of Russiagate after he met with you?
It's my, like I said earlier, all the information we have and the evidence we have is pointing back to CIA as the operation that was involved in creating this Russiagate. So he certainly has the ability to go into another a special group that was set up inside CIA, according to another whistleblower in another program that CIA was running to spy on President Trump and the Republicans. And also others in the country that they were concerned with. So that also was run, I think, in the same group in CIA, and he certainly fell within Pompeo's jurisdiction when he was the director there. He could have pointed it out, created, and gone in and found out exactly who was involved in the creation of this Goose for Two character, and also the fabrication of the Steele report and all of that. He could have certainly found out all of that and gotten ins into the entire network in the government that was involved with that process of basically trying to create a coup. That was certainly available to him. He had direct access into all the NSA data also. He could have taken care of investigating that. And that's not done with oversight, by the way. So there's no oversight of those people going in and looking at it, or the FBI people going in, or anything. It's only, the only oversight they talk about is, like I said earlier, the analysts within NSA, and that's their concern. NSA is storing the data, and they're concerned about their analysts. Well, they ought to be concerned about a hell of a lot more people, like in the Five Eyes country and all the agencies within the government that Obama gave access to the NSA data with. You know, he ought to be concerned about all of that, because as I told him when I was in the meeting, that all his people and his agency, all the agencies in the intelligence community were lying to him and the president. And he said he found that hard to believe, that there were people who would do that. And I said, well, you don't have to believe me. All he has to do is go read DODIG report 05-Intel-03. That's the third Intel report for 2005, where it went through and they did that investigation on the ThinThread program within NSA, and they found all kinds of corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse, and lying, not just to them, not just to the public, but also to the investigators for the IG group. And they found that also, and they had documented evidence of that. So, I mean, this is basically, the government seems to be more basically based on lying to one another to get upmanship and a better, bigger budget, and I manage more, so therefore I'm better than you or something. I don't know. It's just some mental impairment that they have. So, but that's documented by Inspector General's reports and so on. It's not just, you don't have to just believe me, but I've got my problem was, when I talked to him, I said, I'm an individual here. I used Google and various other things to go into the internet to find out all this evidence. I said, and we're spending over $100 billion on the intelligence community agencies every year. And you can't seem to find this information or find out this data? I mean, we're wasting our money if that's the case.
All right. So,
if I can add one more thing, Dennis.
yeah,
He added one more thing that's important. He kept saying, well, all the information the NSA has and all that's classified. And I said, well, wait a minute. I said, you don't have to worry about that. Executive Order 13526, Section 1.7 says you can't classify evidence of crimes and so on. And there's a number of other things in there. But if you have evidence of a crime, you can't put a classification on it to cover it up, which is what's been going on. So, plus, I also said that, the precedent from the past is when there was a alleged act of war by another country, like in 1962 with the Cuba Missile Crisis. President Kennedy released the classified U-2 photographs of Russian intermediate ballistic missiles in Cuba to the UN and to the public. And another case with President Reagan after the shoot down of the Korean airline over Sakhalin Island, he released the Japanese collection of the ground control of the fighters in the Russian fighters going after the aircraft, and he released a conversation where they said they ordered them to shoot the plane down. So classification be damned. If you're going to talk about an act of war, you better release something that makes people confident that it is in fact an act of war. And they haven't done any of that. And you can't use that excuse, well, it's classified, that's just rubbish. And you can't call it classified when you're covering up and obstructing crimes. That's what I'd like to add.
Okay. I think that's answered a lot of things. Do we have someone else up on the Zoom platform? And let me also say, we should go to the next person. I think that's Sally. And let me also say that for people who just got on, several people apparently have, we seem to be being joined by scores, if not hundreds of people on the YouTube platform. If you're on the Zoom platform, you can raise your hand and we'll try to get to your question. So.
Can you hear me, Dennis?
Yes, I can. Hi.
I'm glad to join. It's been a fascinating conversation. My question actually goes almost back to the very original question from Anne that I think both Bill and Barbara responded to. And it has to do with, if we can't penetrate the people in the government because of the, I guess, basically the whitewash wall. We can't penetrate. The only person you can get to that would make that difference is get to Trump. Has anybody made that attempt? My second question would be to that end, that all of this information, we can't convince in this divisive, I guess, democracy, in this divisive world that we're living right now, convince those that are not supporting the president. They'll just, because they would have to turn over their own bad guys in order to do that. And so how do we penetrate not only that wall in government so that Trump can fight back? Because if he loses this election, everything that everybody said today, all the evidence is going to be that much harder to get out. And I'm frightened for, I think Trump has to win first, because all of this is going to be just another 40-year uphill battle.
Okay, who wants it?
Well,
Barbara, I simply agree with everything she said.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead.
Well, what we've got to do is we've got to attack on every single front. I mean, you've got to basically think about the fact that at this point in our history, it's a huge fight, but it's also a huge opportunity. Never before has this apparatus been so totally exposed. You know, I watch back and forth on the internet various groups of people who are following the coup, and they range in their emotional state from complete despair to a form of optimism, depending on the amount of courage they've actually manifested on any given day to think about what's got to be done to actually save the republic, and whether they consider the task too daunting for them. And what they keep, and I'm actually optimistic about that, because increasingly what these guys are saying, who just 4 weeks ago said, I'm getting my gun, I'm moving to Montana, and I'm waiting for the Civil War, and I hope it doesn't happen, are now saying, hey, we know these things at this point. We've got to organize ourselves to actually get it across. We've got to tell every single congressman and senator, my vote in this election is going to be determined by how you act on this. You know, somebody asked a question about China, and Kurt answered it. The answer I gave previously, I think, is correct, that you have an enormous economic collapse going on worldwide. You have a pandemic going on worldwide. And the answer to that by the intelligence community has not been to, for example, point out to people who in the United States actually moved our manufacturing capacity over to China. Who was that? Rather, the answer to people in the United States is blame China because they somehow came in here and completely stole our manufacturing capability from us, which of course is nonsense. So the point is that there's levels of deception going on here, which you have to sit back and really think about as a citizen. And we have a republic, but it is a form of government which depends upon a citizenry which actually thinks through the fact that they're in charge in reality. People look for all sorts of people in the elite. Who could we get to come to our side, this, that, and the other? No, the answer is President Trump won the election in 2016 because the bulk of the population out there, not the elites in Washington, said, we've had enough. We don't believe this anymore. We don't believe what has been, said in terms of the economy. We don't believe anything that's being told to us. Now, that group of people has to move to a much higher level, and that's dependent upon the people on this call realizing that they've got a job to do. and that they've got to not accept lies about foreign powers, essentially creating the basis upon which we have all our problems in the United States. That's nonsense. We have problems because we have failed to actually rebuild our economy. And, a whole group of financiers in Wall Street and the city in London have stood in place of the best intentions of this president to do exactly that. Rather than blaming these other countries, we should go back to what President Reagan did with Lyndon LaRouche on the SDI. We should go back to the notion that we could actually offer up the highest levels of science and technology in a joint race to conquer the frontiers of human knowledge. Think about that. That's a different concept than, the kind of nonsense which people are seeing right now, and why we have these geopolitical types of conflicts. Why is it that we're essentially saying that drug companies are going to get are in a race for the vaccine for COVID, and it's a geopolitical race, as opposed to everybody actually saying, hey, this is really important for the entire human race here. And what we ought to be doing is collaborating at these frontier levels of fundamental science. So, I think that's a thought which I'll throw into the discussion at this point, because I think that, it presents things on a little bit different level.
Okay, very good. So we're going to go back to Diane for a written question and then right back to the Zoom platform. So Diane, why don't you go with your question now?
Okay. This question comes from Helga Zepp-LaRouche, founder of the Schiller Institute. She writes, couldn't the NSA use all of this information to actually stop the drug production, drug traffic, money laundering, etc., as well as terrorism, organized crime, major financial fraud like the recent Wirecard swindle?
Answer is pretty simple. Yes, they can. All that information is available, stored, and recoverable from their databases.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really a matter. It's really a matter of political will. Really, it is. All the information is there, as Bill has just stated.
Good. So now we go back to the Zoom, and I think that's Maram. Is that who it is? Oh, hi.
Hi there. Yes, this is Maram Susli.
Okay, very good. We can hear you, so go right ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Just a brief introduction. I'm a Syrian Australian political analyst and commentator. And one of the things that the DNC leaks revealed was that Clinton and Obama's administration were funding al-Qaeda terrorists in Syria, if you guys recall. And I believe that US policy in Syria is largely what contributed to the breakdown of US-Russia relations. So, in 2016, pre-election Trump promised to pull the US military out of Syria, stop funding terrorists. And at the time, he said he loves WikiLeaks. And now you have the US pursuing charges against Assange. The occupation and sanctions of Syria continue. And they are still funding and arming terrorists. They just happen to be the PKK and YPG Kurdish terrorist organizations that are led by Öcalan. So the thesis that multiple coup attempts have pressured Trump into backtracking on these policies for which he got elected. But what are the odds that actually overthrowing the coup attempts would really have for him to revert back to those pre-election promises, given how close he is to Pompeo now?
Well, I think that I think that may have had some part in the decisions that he's made, but I think he's surrounded by so many warmongers. That's the problem that I see. Warmongers from Congress like McCain and so on, advocating for wars, and if you don't like them, bomb them. It's a policy. We got these warmongers down there. And he's surrounded by so many of them. They're all attacking him on a different front. And if he did something like that, he would alienate someone more. So there's probably a good deal of influence there that he needed to appease. So he tried pulling out as many people as he could, but leaving something back there, some troops back there, just to appease the existing warmongers we have down there. But the other point is that Syria is not the first time we were supporting Al Qaeda. It actually first started in Afghanistan. So these people make bad decisions. They're really. I mean, I don't know what the IQ is inside the Beltway in Washington, but it can't be very high.
Kirk, you want to say anything on that?
Well, yeah, I would say it seems like we have people in government, some who are passively complicit, and I would put Congress in that category mostly, but it's really the CIA, I believe, maybe a little bit of the Pentagon, who are actively working to plot and plan skirmishes in the Middle East. And they're operating at this level of, I don't know how else to call it, anal retention. That continually gets us embroiled in very mucky, dirty, cross-political, geopolitical situations that are untenable. And I think Trump has this belief that we need to basically extract ourselves from the Middle East and let those cultures live the way they will naturally evolve. And I think that's what he's trying to do. But as Bill points out, with a CIA who thinks they need to be involved in everything, I think Harry Truman is the guy who said, let's get rid of the CIA. I think I'm right there with good old Harry.
Okay. Barbara, you have anything to say?
I would. Could I add one more quote from Harry Truman? He said, and this was a really good one. He said, "You won't get rich in government unless you're a crook." Now, how many millionaires do we have in Congress? Okay, straight from Harry Truman's mouth.
All right, great. So, Barbara, you have anything, or we're going to go to the next one otherwise?
Well, I just think it's necessary to point out that the British policy from way back, starting with Afghanistan, has been to continuously snooker these intellectual lightweights, as Bill and Kurt have described it, into various things which are not really in the United States' interest. And the effort against Russia really didn't cause a devolving relationship because of Syria. The effort against Russia has been ongoing within the British Commonwealth, really going all the way back to, beginning in 2001, 2002 as an obsession almost, particularly with Putin. And the fact that Putin outflanked them in Syria obviously has caused severe irritation. But that was something of an ongoing drive being directed from the British Commonwealth in terms of the Middle East over a very long period of time. And the United States has traditionally sort of acted like, the muscle to British brawn, American brawn to British brains, as they say. And we've been significantly snookered by that whole thing for a number of years and committed atrocities in our name, which have destroyed our ability to even function really in the rest of the world. So that's the great crime, and it's something that hopefully by actually getting at this apparatus and really concentrating, again, we have an opportunity here. We have an opportunity in which for the first time a lot of this stuff stands very much exposed because Trump simply hasn't caved. Despite all of the craziness, directed at him, they've done more and more and more, and each time they try a new approach to knocking him out, they expose more and more and more of the apparatus, which is a different way of actually looking at it and a more optimistic way of looking at it. And if we just drive right now the point home, using, again, that wonderful lever called the ballot box, which has a way of sobering up even the most cynical of these guys, saying, you're coming home unless you make this a priority to expose and turn this ship around. So that would be my answer.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going back to Diane, who has another written question.
Yeah.
Okay,
This
great.
question, someone writes, it seems to me that when heads of state meet, things get done. And they reference the meetings of Trump's meetings with various leaders before his talks with North Korea. They say, but when Trump wanted to have a phone call with the president of Ukraine, it got leaked somehow to the New York Times. Now we have a proposal on the table from President Putin for a meeting of 5 heads of state from the UN Security Council countries, and Pompeo and Lavrov have discussed this. Do you think that this proposal of the 5 heads of state meeting is perhaps a target of some of these operations?
I'm not quite sure what she means, what the questioner means by a target for intelligence or for subversion or for what. I certainly think that all the intelligence agencies would be trying to monitor all the states, all the leaders of the states involved, and try to find out what their thinking is. I mean, that certainly is what their job would be to do. So. And I'm sure that's reciprocated by all the other countries too in the world, as much as they possibly can, at least to the effect of their ability to do so.
Yes, the answer. I think the answer is clearly yes. And again, you have to look at the people we're targeting here, which is the crazy Democrats. I think more than anybody else, because what is actually being said over and over and over again is Trump is soft on China and he's soft on Russia. And, that has become a major theme in the Biden campaign and creates kind of an imperative where no sane meeting about what the world should look like coming out of the pandemic and coming out of the economic collapse, which we're now going through, could or should come about, except under the terms which they're explicitly proposing, which the world should get together and we should have the Green New Deal, and that will solve all of our problems in a globalist framework. So I think the answer is yes. Any type of state-to-state meeting which would begin to talk on a higher level is definitely a target.
Okay, I think we've got 1 or 2 more people left on the Zoom platform, and after we do that, we're going to close out. So if you've got the next person, I think it's Jim Kavanaugh. Is that who is the next person in the Zoom? And while we're waiting, okay, no problem. While we're waiting, I just let everybody know that for those who are interested, there will be this will be made available, of course, right away. I think if there's any written questions that have not been answered that you want to submit, please do so. And we'll send those to the person to whom you address them for answers. Okay, we can see you.
Okay, excuse me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Jim Kavanaugh. I blog at thepolemicist.net, and I publish on Counterparts and the Polemicist. I'm on Loud and Clear and Bam Necessary on Radio Sputnik frequently. I just want to say the idea that Donald Trump is some kind of savior from something appears to me as silly. And, it's like the Democrats thinking that Joe Biden is going to save us, or Obama did, or whatever. Donald Trump clearly is part of the swamp. He's not going to drain it. He's clearly committed to the principles of American imperialism and Zionism, and he's going to do what's necessary about that. And he has certain ideas. He's had certain things that he's done. He seems to be psychologically, reluctant to go to full-scale war, but he's easily pushed into it by the people around him, the people of the deep state that he is entirely a part of. And At the end of the day, as even you have discovered, you don't go into this apparatus and give them the evidence and they turn around and say, oh, this is wonderful. They're committed to certain things in the world that require militarism and that require surveillance of everybody, and they're going to continue to do it. And Donald Trump is nobody's savior. He's not going to save us from this. He's part of the problem. And it's really silly to kind of say, oh, what we got to do is reelect Donald Trump. It's not going to do any better. And there's nothing in his history or in his politics or his policies that indicates, even when he's under attack, that he understands what to do and is willing to do it.
Okay, great. So
I only have one counterpoint to that. Basically, if you looked at what happened when the Iranians shot down that unmanned drone, and the Pentagon was pushing an attack on Iran as a reciprocal action, and the President Trump said, "How many people are we going to kill if we do this?" And they said about 150, and he said he refused to do it because for the shooting down of an unarmed drone, we're going to go kill people. He said he's not going to do it. So that does say that he's going to be limited, and that was in spite of the Pentagon pushing him and all the warmongers pushing him.
I agree. And as a leftist, I've written that was the most resistant, the presidential act that was the most resistant to militarism since John Kennedy refused air support at the Bay of Pigs. And it has to be recognized as such. And that does one of the things that indicates Trump does, I believe, have a certain kind of propensity to avoid. But on the other hand, he went out and killed General Soleiman. That was a very nasty act. On the other hand, he just last week signed a document saying, yes, I'm giving the CIA and I'm giving the NSA permission to wage cyber warfare without even coming to the White House or the National Security Council to ask for it, right? He's going to do everything that the Israelis want at the end of the day. Perhaps because the Pentagon, if you look at the news reports about that attack, they say that the Pentagon was not as much on it as Pompeo was, and Bolton were, because the Pentagon knows there's going to be a problem if they attack Iran, full-on military attack. But they are waging war against Iran in a very dangerous way, and this is the point. He's not. The sanctions are designed to push Iran into trying to do something, into responding. So it's absolutely a militaristic and imperialist action against Iran. And
I'm not right. I don't want to set you down, but really, we got like limited time. Let me just see if anybody else.
Just wanted to put those things out.
No. We don't want to just pull out the hook. We're just saying that we got the message.
All the Trumpism here has got my.
Right. So, anybody else want to say anything? Barbara, you have anything?
Just that President Trump is one who likes to address problems and attack them in one way or another. So, I think in the militaristic time, he's trying to pull back from that. It's fairly clear to me that that's what his underlying theme is. I don't see that. I see him fighting these militarists all around. So, I think he's the only hope. The rest of them went along with it. The rest of them got us into all these endless wars.
Okay. All right, great. So thank you for what you said, and we can take it up more in another forum. So, all right, Diane. Let's go to Diane. I think you've got another written question, right? I think we're going to go to you, and then one more on Zoom. Go ahead.
Okay, it's a follow-up from Helga Zepp LaRouche. I think she's wants something done. She says, so if the NSA has all this information, couldn't anyone who wants to go after drug production, drug trafficking, money launder, terrorism, could demand or force the NSA to provide that information through the Freedom of Information Act, rather than have the NSA de facto being complicit with all these crimes? So she says, what is your advice on this?
I would say, yes, that's exactly what should be done, that we should in some way do a motion to get the courts to force this kind of information out. After all, what they have is evidence of a crime, and they are, by Executive Order 13526, Section 1.7, not allowed to classify criminal activity and hide it behind a classified stamp. So that certainly is the way I've been advocating that we use this executive order, which governs all classification for the United States government, right? That they use that as a lever to force this kind of information out of them, including all this internal corruption and fraud and waste and all of that that's going on. Yeah, that really should be. We need to put motions into the court to force that out.
And I would agree with that totally.
Okay. All right, very good. So I think we're back at the Zoom platform. I'm not entirely sure what our situation is. I know we're a little bit limited on time, but let's see if we can get everybody that's still in the platform. So if we have, who do we have? We have Alvin, or do we have Celia?
Can you hear me?
Ah.
Well, okay, go right ahead. Wherever we have.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
we can.
Hello, everyone. This is Kim.com. Bill, I have a question to you, and it has nothing to do with the DNC leak.
Okay.
But with your expertise from your time at the NSA and what your understanding is of the Five Eyes partnership. It's well known, I think, known to you that I'm under indictment in the US, that the US wants to extradite me from New Zealand, and that in the process of getting there, the GCSB, which is one member of the Five Eyes in New Zealand, has spied on me. Through my efforts in the courts, we're able to discover that, and the Prime Minister of New Zealand apologized to me for that illegal act, because the GCSB is not allowed to spy on their own citizens. Now, my understanding is that it is the same in the United States.
That's
the
right.
NSA is not allowed to take full content from communications of Americans. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, it's an illegal act. It's a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Yes. But the NSA is allowed to spy on everyone else full take outside of the United States.
That's correct.
Correct. So what happened here in New Zealand, in my case, the GCSB was not allowed to spy on New Zealanders. I was a New Zealand resident, so I fall within that category.
Yep.
What they did to spy on me is they used X-Keyscore, the tool that Edward Snowden has told us about, which is basically a Google search for everything that's on the spy cloud.
But actually, I think they used the IC Reach program. And the reason they did that is because the IC Reach program is for the Five Eyes interrogation of the collective database that NSA has for all of them. It includes all their citizens and everything. So they went in through if you look it up, do a Google on the IC Reach, NSA IC Reach program, and you'll see the diagrams of how they do this and how they were set up to do it. It includes the internal agencies of the U.S. government as well as the Five Eyes countries.
Yeah. Bill, I know this.
And it gives them, and if I can, it gives them a greater reach into the database. In other words, this database is partitioned. If you use X-Keyscore, you have limited access to the data. There's a partition that there's, like, for example, I'm sure that all the domestic collection inside the U.S. is not part of the is not accessible by X-Keyscore, but it is by IC Reach. You see?
Yeah. So we know all this because we had discovery. And we were given the interface that was used to type in my phone number. And it was classified as selector data. So my phone number was the selected data. They typed it into that interface, and then they were given access to all my communications that the NSA or other Five Eyes partners have ever gathered about me in their entire history of full take collection. Now, the question that I have here, and I think it's the most dangerous and also most interesting question that I have not seen anyone ask at all. If New Zealand was able to access the collective spy cloud to circumvent their own laws of spying against New Zealand residents, what makes you think, or how do you feel about the US doing this with GCHQ in the UK, where the UK has full take access on US citizens because their law does not prohibit spying on all US citizens,
Yep.
and then the US simply uses the merged spy cloud to then get access to anything that the UK has taken from US citizens, and therefore circumventing domestic legislation that prohibits that activity.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons that I've been complaining about a lack of oversight. The oversight of all this stuff in terms of the collection of all the countries involved. There are like about 9 other countries that participate other than the Five Eyes at collecting this data into this common database. And there is no oversight of any of the interrogations of any of those countries into it. The only oversight we hear talked about is the oversight of NSA analysts looking at that data because that database is resident in NSA. But it doesn't tell you what all the others are doing, internal agencies in the US government or agencies from the GCHQ or CSE or any of them. Any of the Five Eyes, they can all get into this data, and even the other countries can get into parts of the data too using the X-Keyscore program. So, and there's no oversight or watching on any of that. There's no, and that's why I've been arguing that we should have used the principles we set up in the ThinThread program. Then all of this data, the data about you or anything else, unless you had a warrant on you, would never be in that database, and no one could abuse it.
Trent.
Okay, very good. So what we're going to do is we're going to take another 3 questions. There are a lot more coming in, but I think we're going to have to limit it. I will say that there are other things going on. If you are in touch with us in various ways, if you contact us, I know there's a conference call that Bill and Kirk and Barbara will be addressing tonight. You can find out about that. And there are other activities as well. I've got one question I'm going to read, which is from an Argentinian journalist by the name of Dario Minskas. And the question is straightforward. It is, are you people suffering in the United States a color revolution like the Middle East? I'll repeat it. Are you people suffering in the United States a color revolution like that of the Middle East? Who would like to take that?
What's the word before revolution?
Color revolution. Barbara, would you
Color
like to?
revolution.
Yeah, would you like to elaborate so Kirk knows what that refers to?
What's being referred to there, Kurt, is the idea of the types of coups which the United States has conducted in other countries using various colors like the white rose, the various things which have been run through Project Democracy. And I don't know whether Kurt and Bill want to answer that. I think it's different than a color revolution. I think the color revolution part of this was the Pink Pussycat Feminist March, which greeted the president when he was first elected. I think what's going on in the United States at this point is appropriately called a full-scale insurrection, which, as opposed to a color revolution, which kind of is a circumscribed event for a period of months, it's been very clear that we've been going through this for 4 years in an escalating fashion. So I call it an insurrection rather than a color revolution, although it's tempting to use that historical analogy.
I would agree with that.
Okay, great. Leave it at that. All right, then let's go back to Zoom. And I understand one person that wasn't able to get an audio, but I believe I have an email from Celia. So I'm going to try to get and read her email. So if you can go back to the Zoom platform and we see who we have there at the moment. if you still need time, I found the question, I believe. This is Celia's question, so I'll ask this while we bring up the Zoom platform. He asked this: viruses, in quotes, since the mid 80s are used now as major geopolitical and economic weapons, now as radical revolutionary tools for social engineering and ever new forms of surveillance, enforced compliance, various new tyrannies. Are you aware of this as a shift in the way that Americans can be attacked? Would you, in such a case, be willing to say who or what forces do you believe are behind this? What can America do? Now, this is not saying that the virus is not real or something like that around coronavirus, but this is sort of a broader question about, political viruses, pestilences, like usury or things like that. So that's the question. Anybody want to take it? Okay, Kirk has his hand up. Go ahead, Kirk.
Yeah, let me just briefly say that biological and chemical warfare has for decades been recognized as a feasible way of conducting warfare. So I don't think the notion that coronavirus could be such a weapon, inadvertently or on purpose unleashed. But the concept is certainly one that's been around a long time. So I don't think it's novel, if you will. And we should keep an open mind. There's some evidence that the virus was, in fact, engineered. Its DNA was tinkered with. And then the question is, was the release accidental or purposeful? Don't know the answer to that. Maybe time will tell.
Okay. All right. Let's go back to Zoom. Are we on now? We are. Very good. Go ahead, sir. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I would like to ask one question, and first of all, to congratulate you for this fantastic conversation that we've been having here. My question is this: in view of the coronavirus pandemic, will the elections in the United States take place in November, or is there a possibility that they may be postponed for a later time, as happened in some European countries?
I personally rather doubt that it would be delayed simply because it's the law to have the election then. I think they'll still do it one way or the other.
Okay.
Yeah, Kirk, you have something?
Yeah, I would add that the underlying story that is not well known or appreciated by the masses is that the United States system of elections is fraught with problems, full of problems. I don't care what part of it you talk about. It is run by the individual states. It's not a federal issue. The federal government can issue guidelines. It can throw money at the states, but the states basically make their own beds. And I'm going to tell you, it's an area of neglect. The states have not, as a whole, maintained their election systems, whether it's software updates, whether it's updating computer technologies. So the opportunities for cheating are many. The registered voter database is not uniformly updated. So we have dead people sent ballots. We have people voting who are dead or otherwise not in a legal position to vote. So it's not so much the coronavirus. That is certainly a complicating factor. It's many people in the know are predicting chaos in November when the election is going to take place, with many races possibly thrown into the U.S. court system. We won't know who won for perhaps a long time.
One complementary question to that. In my country, Greece, we have refused to do the electronic vote. We vote by paper.
Yeah.
And it's the most effective way. Why don't you do that in the United States and solve many issues like that?
I think we do.
Your question is good.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, that's right. I think that's what President Trump was advocating, a paper ballot. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to go to Diane for a final printed question. I think it comes from the people that got knocked off before. If you're there, Diane.
Yes, I'm here. Joe Hoft from Gateway Pundit, which shortly after we announced they'd been shut down was able to get back on. But I think it's just a coincidence. Anyway, they're asking about Seth Rich. Does the deep state have any information he talked to WikiLeaks as has been reported?
Well, there are reports. Yeah, there are reports that was true. I assume that he's addressing the Cy Hirsch comments in a illicitly recorded recording of his conversation, where he said the FBI had a report that examined Seth Rich's computer and found communication between Seth and WikiLeaks. But that's not come out. I mean, I don't know why. I don't know why the president doesn't order the FBI to follow up with that and say whether that's true or not. He's not done that. I mean, if he orders them and they don't follow it, he can just simply fire them because of for insubordination and hire the next guy and say release it or else. You know, that's the way he could do that. And I think that's primarily what has to happen here, because the FBI is involved in so much cover-up in this activity, not just of that. They haven't followed the investigation as far as I know, and but also you know, they're covering up a lot that they know about the Russiagate issue and all this business. They actually helped pay for Steele at one point for the, and I don't know whether it was directly for the dossier or not, but for him as an agent to work with them. So you know, the government needs to be ordered to do things, and if their level of management refuses, they need to be fired and just get other ones in. And finally, eventually, after you fire so many, somebody you'll find actually wants to do the job and do it right, you know, and they'll comply.
And I think it's also true that there's been a FOIA sent to the National Security Agency, just as Helga LaRouche pointed out. Doesn't the NSA have a large repository of information? Well, guess what? The NSA responded in terms of the question, do they have any documents related to the Seth Rich affair? And the answer was yes. They have about 32 pages, but it's classified. So again, this black box of classification is being used to cover up facts related to a crime. In my book, that's a violation of the executive order governing classification. So we should be hopeful and we should push. And in asking everyone in authority, why don't you release what you know about the Seth Rich matter?
Yep.
All right. Very good. I think we should probably at this point go to summaries. And Barbara, I think we should start with you. It's also, if you have anything to say about that other matter, you could say that and make it a summary statement at this point also.
Well, again, the key to the Seth Rich mystery really does rest with Julian Assange and Craig Murray and the people around WikiLeaks, aside from whatever was recorded from Cy Hirsch's conversations. And, you know, the very fact that our Justice Department is pursuing this case, this phony case, set up by people who have been fired from the Justice Department for their participation in the coup, like Dana Boente, the former chief counsel for the FBI, is just indicative of how far we have to go here. And again, you know, I bring it back to what we've been talking about all along. It's the information is there. There is a ton of it. If people, you know, simply look it up and look what was published already in all of these things. Look at the Flynn case, look at Roger Stone's case, look at what the congressional hearings released of stuff that was already known way back in 2017, prior to Robert Mueller. And that's a whole other area here which has not been taken up. These phony prosecutions and the lawyers, the top level of the Justice Department. Remember, what's been investigated so far in the Department of Justice is only the FBI role in this entire fiasco. What has not been investigated is the lawyers who actually facilitated all of this, who told the FBI this you can do and this you can't do. We also have to come back and focus on that January 5th meeting at the White House, which very clearly involved Biden, it involved Obama, it involved Susan Rice, all of them plotting to get Michael Flynn out of the way. Why was Michael Flynn targeted? Because out of everybody who was coming in the Trump administration, he was the only guy who knew his way around the intelligence community from Trump's standpoint, potentially. And he was talking about precisely some of the things which we've been talking about today. He was talking about a complete audit of the U.S. intelligence community and a complete redoing of everything that was going on. So it comes back to the fact that there's a lot of stuff out there which people already know. And you have to basically, I hope today's conversation would be something like a thunderclap, which should hit you over the head and essentially say, the country's at stake here. Really, the question of war and peace is at stake here. And we've got to make the reforms we've been talking about today and do them very quickly.
Okay, Bill?
Well, I'd just like to say that there are ways and means to succeed at stopping all kinds of criminal activity in a constitutional way. And our government is not doing that. And in fact, they have such an incestuous relationship between the agencies that they conspired to do a attempted coup against a duly elected president. Now, to me, this entire set of situations and what the FBI and the police are doing with this data is basically putting our country, and I would go back to the Lincoln quote that Barbara had mentioned earlier. It's a question now whether we are a country of the people, by the people, and for the people anymore, or if we're going, this government and republic will perish from the earth. That's really what's at stake here.
All right. Kirk?
Yes. We're in an age and in an instant, talk about living in the moment, right now, before our eyes, where the classification, and let me say misclassification, misutilization of the term "it's classified" is being used to protect and advance corrupt processes, corrupt interests within the United States government. And until this cancer is removed, it remains the biggest threat today to our form of government. It must be dealt with directly and harshly. And frankly, I'm worried, extremely worried, whether or not we will actually hear the truth and hold the illegal parties responsible. It's a big question mark. Will we find the guts to do what needs to be done for the sake of the nation?
So I want to thank William Binney, Barbara Boyd, and Kirk Wiebe for being with us today. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We obviously have a job to do. I think in part we did it today. I think we should continue this kind of development and expansion of dialogue among Americans, including with contrasting and conflicting views. I think we had a little bit of that today, and we should have more of it. I think the moment that we find ourselves in, with a multiply connected group of crises that we are confronted with, brings to mind something that we have to think about. And in the words of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, there's a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted all the voyage of their life is bound up in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves, or lose our venture. And our venture is the American government itself. We have no choice. We have to fight now. This is not a partisan question. This is a question of principle. And the issue is that if American citizenship is to mean more than it meant to the subjects of Rome, who only called themselves citizens, it is our moment to prove that that is the case. It's our moment to prove that this is our time. And therefore, government of, by, and for the people did not perish from the earth. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. And there will be a next time, I will assure you. And we hope that in that next time, things will be better than they are today.